I think technology is maturing, but the reality is there is still like serious infra on the backend that needs to be migrated. And that's still probably the biggest hurdle, but also means it's sort of sticky technology, right? The same reason people then exit like fruit farms, it's because it's easy. It's much harder than to change from DVs.
Welcome to High Stakes, the podcast committed to demystifying the institutional adoption of blockchain technology. I'm your host, Alex Nwaka, and today we're elevating the Web3 discourse in a series of conversations with industry iconoclasts that are shaping the future of Web3. Now let's get started. Welcome back to another episode of High Stakes. I am your host, Alex Nwaka, and today I am joined by Toma, who is the CEO of Obol Association. Welcome, Toma.
Hey, Alex. Happy to be here.
So, Toma, a lot of folks who are listening are probably not familiar at all with Obol and what you all do. So maybe let's just start with, talk to us a bit about Obol, its mission, and, what it's enacting in sort of the Web3 ecosystem.
Cool. Yeah, happy to. So I like to think about Obol as the largest operator ecosystem out there that's serving decentralized network secure their stake, especially proof of stake networks like Ethereum. So we provide that added security, that added performance, reduce risk to networks like Ethereum. And we do that by pioneering, and we were first on mainnet on this, a concept called distributed validators, which is a way to really improve the security and the efficiency and the rewards of how you're running your proof of stake network. But maybe it's first worth going maybe into a bit the supply chain of how proof of stake networks work and the different actors, so that distributed validators can make a bit more sense.
Sure. Let's do that. Let's give the audience, let's zoom out now to, what's the overall value chain look like in staking for proof of stake networks, right? Because there's a variety of different, what I'll call relevant parties, constituencies that, make all of this happen in terms of the participation in consensus and then generating, block rewards and yield on sort of delegation. So maybe why don't you talk about how you see it in terms of the value chain at a high level and the key players?
Yeah, no, I think that's useful just to understand and how DVs fit in. So I like to start from the human side of things, actually, because at the end, all these things are just technologies, and that means there is actually a human behind it that's doing at least some sort of task. And for proof of stake networks like Ethereum, I like to refer to these humans or these entities as the operators, which are running the machines. And those machines, we call them nodes typically in the blockchain world, right? And in a proof of stake blockchain, you have two types of nodes. Your regular node, which is just relaying transactions. And then you can sort of upgrade your node and make it a validator. And in that case, what you're doing is put some capital at stake, hence the word proof of stake. And then that node becomes like a bit more than just relaying transaction, but it's also validating the transaction, making sure they respect the consensus and the rules of the network and also propose blocks. And for doing that work, you get rewards. And if you don't do that work properly, then you lose rewards or income. And that's what's called slashing. Now, the issue in that setup is that at the end of the day, you still have a human or an entity somewhere trying to do their job of running that machine effectively. And what we've seen from the existence of proof of stake networks is that doesn't always go right. Sometimes the humans forget to do the latest upgrade, they lose the private keys, or sometimes it's just outside of their control. We saw, I think, in the case of the Lido DAO recently, one of the operators had their machines in a data center in South Africa, which lost internet for like 6 hours. So that's quite interesting, right? That's outside of their power, and they're relying on these machines, and suddenly they don't have access to these rewards, right? And that means the capital provider, the people providing the ETH, are not getting like the level of yield that they should be getting either, right? Another case was in the Los Angeles fires recently. I think we also saw a number of validators go offline. Some of them were maybe like smaller setups that they had at home, like your typical home staker. You might have cloud providers that may ban staking. I think we had that, was it like a couple of years ago in Germany with Erzner or something like that, said like, no more staking on us, right? So you have all these like external forces plus the humans, which we know are highly unreliable, unfortunately, operate these machines, which are trying to do their best. And so distributed validators is a way to sort of mitigate all these forces and all these risks that just drive downtime, that can drive like less rewards for the protocol or for the person putting the stake. And the way we do that is a bit the same concept than a multisig. I think most people understand like a safe multisig where it's, for example, 3 keys out of 4 are required to perform a transaction. If you have the 3 keys, then you can send the funds or you can do whatever like smart contract call you want. But if you have 1 key that's missing, that's not a big deal. Like you don't have your ledger or you lost that key or it got compromised. 3 out of 4 is enough. So you can think about the same for your validator. Instead of it being on one machine that's unreliable because of its geo or its operator, or as I said, like other factors, you're splitting it across several machines, potentially in different places, run by different people, so that if 3 out of 4 of these machines are doing their job okay, the validator keeps earning the rewards. And that's super powerful because that means that at any point in time, you can have one that goes dark for XYZ reason, and the validator just stays online, keeps earning rewards. That's good for the capital provider, higher rewards, higher performance. And that's also good for Ethereum. Ethereum is not good when you have nodes that are offline because that's just like a load on the network. You can have things like correlated slashing, etc. So it just keeps the network healthy and also keeps the reward flowing for the people that are staking.
Got it. And, so I think to just put that and wrap it in a nutshell, it's really the diversification of like the operating risk of a validator, right? By, creating sort of like pooling that risk amongst multiple providers.
Correct. To be honest, it's nothing like crazy for Web 2 that exists like for a long time in Web 2. When you go on the internet and you give that ChatGPT prompt, it's actually hitting a server somewhere. And if that server is offline for XYZ reason, like another server will give you that answer, right? But in the centralized Web 2 model, it's easy. You can just replicate things. And you can have entire copies of those servers to give the response to the user. But in the case of blockchains, you can't have the same validator key or the validator do the same job. Otherwise, you have something called slashing. So it's sort of the same high availability security concept that Web2 has, and we just brought it to Web3. Actually, we didn't even do it. It's on Vitalik's roadmap. If you remember these like 5 boxes that Vitalik has, right? Mm-hmm. And right after the merge, the next item was distributed validators. So this has been on the roadmap for 5 years. Plenty of ideas for businesses. It's just out there looking at the roadmap.
No, absolutely. I mean, it's interesting that the history is this has been on the roadmap, so to speak, for Ethereum for 5 years. And I would say even today, as we think about like the mind share around DVT, when you talk to folks who are, I would say in the institutional realm who know a little bit about staking, but don't know a ton about like the, sort of the detail around how it works. If you mention, distributed validator technology to them, it's very clear they don't have, any knowledge of it, I guess, today. But when you think about, Toma, let's call it the near term implications of DVT, and then, also then the spectrum down to long-term implications of DVT. How do you see those two things, at least, as it relates to how we see the technology today?
What's funny with that question is that it has quite evolved, sort of the value prop of distributed validators over time, as the market is maturing as well. And by the way, I prefer to refer to distributed validators rather than distributed validator technology. It's sort of like every technology in its infancy needs the word technology to seem legit. But once it's sort of adopted, you don't need to say the internet technology anymore. People understand what it is. So that's a branding issue we're trying to fix. We should have gone with DVs from day one. But regardless, I think initially the problem we were solving was mostly around preventing slashing. So that's when 2 validators come online at the same time. Typically, that's a setup where to maximize uptime, and because some of these machines do have some downtime, might lose internet, sort of things, the operator was having like a backup machine with a copy of the private key. And sometimes the 2 of them would come up online because of software failure, and that would create a slashing. So the capital would lose some of its 32 ETH, let's say. And I think there's been around 30 slashing events on the network. And was initially like a big fear for those operators and those like capital provider. How do we minimize slashing? Because all of the software was very much in its infancy. And in a DV setup, you didn't need that backup server anymore because you could just have like 3 out of 4. And if one fails, that's fine. The rest just keeps running. So that was like how we initially got started and went to market. Now, by the time we were already on mainnet in late 2022, another problem had come up, which we realized distributed validators were actually even better at solving. And that was all of the backlash that Lido was getting at the time around being a centralizing force for Ethereum. I don't know if you remember, but people were like, we need to like hard cap Lido. We might need to fork. They control too much of the stake. It's a risk, etc., etc. Which was a super interesting debate. People still have their opinion. Is it a centralized entity or is it like a number of entities like you that run the stake? I think it's probably in between. But what we saw is these protocols started wanting to really increase the number of node operators so that it decreases the centralization risk, which is very important. And I agree, decentralization matters. By the way, that's another rabbit hole. I don't think we should talk about decentralization. I think no one cares, especially people who are not in crypto. I think that's like a branding that engineers do. Like when they're deep into something, they talk about decentralization. And then I think it's our job now to talk about things like security or performance. I think decentralization means it's not very useful word, but regardless. So back then, Lido was seen as a centralizing factor, so that would like decrease the importance or the reliance of Ethereum as a credibly neutral layer, let's say. And so they tried to expand, and the node operator said, but they couldn't really do it safely because at the end of the day, they had to trust like humans and entities. These operators I referred to earlier with large chunk of capitals. I think at the time, like each operator was running about $1 billion in stake. So that's a lot of risk. That person can go away with the funds. Of course, there's like legal things around it, but it was still seen as a big risk for Lido to just like add any random sort of operator without doing proper checks. And so when they looked into distributed validators, they realized, well, if we put these operators that we don't know very well together in a cluster and they each operate like a partial key of the validator, suddenly if one of them goes rogue or doesn't perform, it's okay. They can't go away with the funds and the performance will still stay very good. And so that was a way for protocols like Lido to really scale the number of operators. And they've done that through what they call the simple DVT module. EtherFi, which I believe you're also an operator of, also had a similar program for home stakers. And so that was really the second use case for distributed validators. Increase the number of operators within liquid staking and restaking protocols. That really strengthens then at the end of the day their protocol and the confidence that people have in them, but also just Ethereum as a whole. So that's kind of where we are today. Most of the stake on Obol, $1 billion and going to $2 billion is coming from liquid staking protocol and restaking protocols. And what we're seeing now is like, I think this is going to be the third use case for distributed validators, still the same technology, but different use case. And that's going to be for these institutions that are coming. I think everyone's looking very closely what's going to happen with this staked ETF. We have like this very large pool of capital that are trying to minimize risk. And I think for them, it's kind of scary to, again, trust one operator with 10 billion of stake. Doesn't it sound actually nicer to have like a 3 out of 4 setup where none of them have too much like control over the funds? I think that's also very reassuring as well for a custodian that might be managing some of these funds. So I think the institutions now are coming in terms of de-risking the counterparty risk. And that's sort of the latest, I think, arc that we're embarking on with distributed validators.
When you think about that third bucket, the institutional sort of adoption story, what do you see as the biggest challenge there and hurdle? Is it just purely education on how the technology works? Is it, other embedded interests? Is it, sort of the simplicity of, vendor onboarding of, hey, these folks are already working maybe with a custodian that is going to have their own views on which, types of staking providers they work with. So how do you see, the challenges of like breaking into that use case specifically? Because to your point, I think it's the most anticipated sort of net new capital that's coming into the staking ecosystem probably this year. Is going to be coming from, call it the ETF issuers and the institutional capital around that.
That's an interesting one. I think everyone is really trying to figure out and map out like all the different actors and how do you go about that market. I think the issuers themselves are sort of scrambling as fast as they can, trying to include staking in the current ETFs. And what you see is actually a lot of M&A action happening, right? I think Bitwise acquired Attestant, and then there was someone for crypto manufacturer as well. So I think various operators are getting acquired by these like big issuers. And I think that's a proof that even the issuers have no clue and they know they need to rely on the operators. So we're kind of lucky that we've been working with operators like yourself for a while. You understand like the value of the technology. And I think that's more where the play is going to be. I don't know if the issuers or the SEC will really take the time to understand distributed validators. They will just look at the end of the day, what was the downtime, what was the number of rewards, and they will use that as a comparison. We saw it with the Bitcoin ETFs, like the competition on pricing gets like super, super tight on the fees. And so for staking ETF, what that's going to mean is like how performance and how much uptime can you get from your validators. And distributed validators today operate like better than standard validators. That was a big fear for us initially. Isn't like all this setup going to slow things down? But it turns out it's actually even better performance just thanks to the uptime. Now, another big hurdle so far has been sort of migrating stake. As you know, like running these machines, there is real infra here, like data centers and like machines and software. It's not just deploying like ETH into the latest like fruit farm DeFi protocol, right? That's kind of easy to do. Like that migration is done in a day. As you know, like rolling out and moving these machines even physically sometimes can take time. So I think it takes a while for people to change sort of their infrastructure. And so there is a lot of evaluation and time that goes on there. Now, I am quite optimistic that this lead time will decrease thanks to Pectra and the consolidations that allow migrations to be done in a much faster way. So for those that are not super familiar there with the upcoming hard fork on Ethereum, Pectra really allows you to sort of migrate your validator from let's say a normal setup to a distributed validator setup without having to exit the queue and then re-enter, which can take a month. Again, lose rewards, all that stuff that those issuers are not going to want. If you miss 12 months, 12 or a month of rewards, that's going to be a lot for them. But if you can do it with a click, that might make things easier. So I think technology is maturing, but the reality is there is still like serious infra on the back end that needs to be migrated. And that's still probably the biggest hurdle, but also means it's sort of sticky technology, right? The same reason people then exit like fruit farms, it's because it's easy. It's much harder than to change from DVs.
No, totally. And I think from just my own like professional background and just conversations that I have in the industry and the institutional side, institutional finance is fundamentally a risk-oriented business, right? And so I think there's a significant amount of focus on slashing as an example. I also think there's a significant amount of focus on compliance and like what are the rules of the road to design sort of process and sort of select, different approaches to things. You kind of have to do that off of a fixed point, which, we sort of need market structure for. And so that feels like it's coming or on the come, especially in the US. Mm-hmm. And, the other thing that I'll sort of add in is, there is an element of education that generally just, has to take place, right, as it relates to DVs and sort of how they, bring sort of a better, sort of solution to the current paradigm in staking in terms of reducing that sort of counterparty risk or that operator risk as we're talking about, while also, creating sort of the conditions, so to speak, for, getting to optimal sort of rewards as it relates to the protocol yield and so forth. So I think that'll become evident. And I think what you're also talking about is really core to our beliefs at Validation Cloud in terms of how we built our infrastructure. Everything has been around for us for performance, scalability, and compliance. It's always how we've thought about how we design world-class product. And in our view is that performance is going to be something that also, as it relates to this domain, is going to be extremely important. One question for you, Toma, that might be interesting for folks to know is, what are the biggest misconceptions that you hear on DVs? Like what's something that just comes up that like is either patently like not correct or just completely wrong that folks think about DVs?
It's interesting because I was answering one today for an Asian fund looking at the tech. And I think what they were asking for was, well, that's a different stack, right? That's a lot of additional risk from new code that I'm not sure your tech mitigates. And I think that's a misconception in the sense that we've always designed our middleware or our technology as a middleware, actually, that really plugs into your existing stack. It's like super lean. It's compatible with all the execution client, consensus client, and then your validator client itself. And Charon, which is our middleware there that each machine within the cluster runs, doesn't even have access to the private key at runtime. So we actually are like a very small piece within the stack. and don't need to recreate your entire stack. So I think that's one of the misconceptions. And as I said, post Spectra, it's going to be quite easy to especially migrate and add that middleware to your current stack. The second piece is often about performance. I think intuitively people think more machines, more latency, this thing is going to be slower, proposing blocks, that's inclusion delays, etc. But again, we've seen that we're on par, if not better, than traditional validators. So you can go to rated.network and check that. So that was really one of our fears initially, but it turns out the engineering team is actually pretty good and have managed to turn around a middleware that has plenty of time to do all the consensus before pushing the duties. Meaning like we're really on par in terms of performance and rewards.
Got it. Well, let's just, look at a world where DVs become the standard, whether that's 3 years from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, just becomes the standard of how, sort of the staking ecosystem operates. Who wins, who loses, in sort of the context of the industry that is, surrounding staking? Is it, the existing sort of like large sort of validator staking companies? Does it inure to the benefit effectively of the stakers and the delegators? So how do you see the winners and the losers if DVs become sort of industry standard?
That's a good question. I think that the winners are quite easy. I think definitely Ethereum at large, like it becomes a more resilient network. It is the only credibly neutral network out there. Unfortunately, we see it every day with like North Korea, for example, using it. There is a reason, right? Like it's not that we accept that, but it's the only network that's really censorship resistant. And that's something that we should be really proud of. And distributed validators just strengthen that. So any user of Ethereum will gain from that. It will make it more resistant to attacks. We also, the Bybit hack recently, like DV is just like net positive for every user of Ethereum. If we go into the staking supply chain more specifically, I think that's a bit more tricky. My guts tell me that fees will probably sort of compress over time. We'll see where they settle. And today, like the operator takes a fee, the DV provider takes a fee, the ETF issuer takes a fee. So I think it's going to be a bit of a battle or competition there in seeing like who manages to keep their fee locked in while the others get their fee compressed. And I think that's also why we're seeing a lot of vertical integration going on. It wouldn't surprise me for these like ETF providers to have like the full stack integrated so that they don't have to pay these intermediary fees. So that's going to be interesting, I think, to look at. In general, like distributed validators are not competing really directly with the rest of the stack. As I said, we're middleware. And actually the few providers that did try to also launch a liquid staking protocol on top of their DV protocol haven't gone really far because you're basically starting competing with your customers, which is, in my opinion, not a super smart idea. So by staying a lean like middleware and serving the rest of the stack, we're actually pretty complementary. So I think it's probably like a net benefit there. But the fee market is going to be interesting to monitor.
Yeah, absolutely. I think my spin on that would be that, we'll see the shifting and sort of distribution of value, so to speak, on the, sort of operator side be the most common sort of impact. I agree with you on sort of the macro level on Ethereum is probably as a community and as a network in a much, better place, right? And is a clear winner. And I think on the, sort of the supply chain or sort of the value chain of staking, I just think you see, value move to different types of players within that sort of stack and ecosystem.
And that makes sense, right?
Yeah, of course.
That makes sense because it's the largest out there. Like I don't think people understand or realize that staking, especially on Ethereum, is the largest like crypto total addressable market. It's like hundreds of billion. People are like all proud and when they get like $1 billion in their DeFi protocol, and props to them. But like staking is such a bigger industry and I think it will keep growing. So that means obviously there is a lot of attention behind the scenes. But I feel like a lot of the market doesn't realize like that a lot of people are going after that then.
Well, also too, and what we're not talking about is like how the pie will grow, right, over time as well as you see sort of more applications and more things come into the ecosystem, right? And so there's just sort of a natural growth that also comes with that as well. One thing I did want to ask you is, it's sort of like, what's like a really out there use case for DVs that like no one's talking about right now? but you think will be like real in the next 5 years. So what would be one or two of those things?
I can give you the crazy or the non-crazy and then the crazy version. So I think the non-crazy, I think every ETF will run DVs. No one will know what DVs are, but all the ETFs will be running some. I don't think many people need to know what distributed validators are. It's an infrastructure on the back end. No one knows how the internet work. I don't think anyone should know how Ethereum works in 5 years, really. That's for people like you and me to figure out. The more exciting, crazy piece is around validating from your phone. So I don't know if you've heard Vitalik sometimes talk about like light clients that everyone could be running on their phone so that you get like direct access to the network in a privacy preserving way. So what I sometimes imagine is you wake up, you turn on your phone, and it auto join a mega cluster that has, I don't know, like 100 nodes in it. And while you're online, while you're scrolling, it's actually participating into that like distributed validator. And you only need like 2/3 of the nodes really to be online. So if you shut down your phone out of nowhere, it doesn't really affect the performance of that validator that's running in the backend. And then you earn like micro rewards that can pay for, I don't know, your subscription for the month for running your phone or having like data access. So I find that quite interesting where validators become sort of very mutable and like liquid within the space, and people join on and off, make rewards really easily. A bit like when I was younger, I had this like PlayStation 3 and you could just opt it in so that it would do like some math for some university. Like I feel like this is a bit similar where you would just use sort of the latent like power of your phone and you're validating, making some rewards, and then you don't even know. It's just like something you set on in the settings.
It's really fascinating because we've seen hints at, what I'll call mobile distribution in sort of the Web3 ecosystem. Before there was the talk of the Solana phone. And so this is sort of an interesting like sort of spin on that in a little bit of a way. And I think when you think about, we have more phones than we have human beings on the planet. In some cases, when you go to some geographies, there's, 2 phones per person in some of these geographies. It really becomes an interesting sort of potential distribution channel for the technology in a way that is, to your point, somewhat passive, but adds a lot of what I would, for lack of a better term, sort of liquidity, so to speak, to the technology and to the ecosystem writ large.
I agree. I think today validators are like a very static technology because there is the infra on the back end, because there is the operator. But I do see that through things like you could even tokenize a validator. And so you could sort of sell it to someone else. That's something that we're actually exploring. I think validators will become much more like fluid within the space.
Mm-hmm. So, we've talked a lot about Ethereum and for good reason. To your earlier point, it's sort of the largest and most important network in proof of stake. There's obviously other proof of stake networks out there. There are also similar paradigms to proof of stake as it relates to app chains and so forth. From Obol's perspective, and as you think about DVs evolving, is there anything to be said for expanding integrations to other types of proof of stake networks or app chains? And how do you think about that? Is it, hey, Ethereum is just such a big and important, network that we want to get that right and really saturate that, proof of stake network and get that, to 100%, DV if possible? Or do you think about expanding what I would, I guess, term horizontally into other proof of stake networks?
Absolutely. So I think different networks need different things. Ethereum is the only one that seems today very focused on keeping its decentralization / security, as I said earlier, very seriously. So I think it made sense to start there because we are security software. But earlier in this chat, I also talked about how we can also, for example, improve the number of operators that you're running. And so I think these like value props appeal more to other ecosystems. So we recently announced a partnership with Magma, which is a liquid staking protocol on Monad. And for them, for like these earlier networks, proof of these that are trying to decentralize, even before being really resilient, what they just need is operators. And it turns out that we have a ton of operators that really know how to run distributed validators and just distributed software in general. We've certified them, we've trained them. And so I think this is like the value we offer for these like more junior proof of stake networks or like It doesn't even have to be proof of stake, to be honest, but it's like adding operators in a safe way. We are also live on Gnosis, but that's like a similar use case, more or less, than Ethereum. If we see even bigger, our design of being that middleware that doesn't take care of the entire stack make a lot of sense in terms of being able to port it to different like consensus blockchains and other type of things, because we're not this massive stack that would have to be redesigned. So the concept is actually quite small and quite lean. So I don't see why many blockchains wouldn't rely on distributed validators. Some might not need because they have like other sort of resilience baked in. If I look at Solana, they have like this multi-proposer setup where they already have some sort of like resilience there if one node fails. So it kind of depends on the objective of the blockchain. And yeah, we're exploring. I think Monad is super interesting. We'll see where that goes. Yeah, waiting for mainnet, really.
Right. No, absolutely. As are we. And so one thing that I wanted to ask you about that's, I think always just an interesting take. What's an unpopular opinion you have about staking or validator infrastructure? Something that you believe that others don't? Maybe an unpopular take.
I'm actually going to steal this one from our CTO, Shinkain, but I'm sure he doesn't mind. So he often answers this question saying that North Korea probably has more private keys than we think, but they just don't know what to do with those. So they probably have like the private keys of validators out there, but either they value Ethereum too much to be able to do their nefarious activities that they don't want to compromise the network, or they're just like accumulating them and might be planning like something big. When I see the scale of their operations, I have very serious doubts that all of these private keys of operators, especially the very early ones from the Genesis period, are safe. So I think, yeah, North Korea does control some of these keys and hasn't done anything about it yet. Now, the good news again, Spectra is coming. You can migrate your validator very easily. You don't need to exit and come back. So there is solution. But if you have the same setup since 5 years or the genesis of the beacon chain, I would invite you to take a look there because I wouldn't be so sure North Korea hasn't put a hand on it.
Yeah, it's a little scary, right?
Yeah, well, you asked for it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I did ask. And then, back into, sort of the world of DVs and sort of adoption. What do you see as sort of the, biggest, it can be external or just sort of existential risk for DV adoption? Are there things out there that, you feel like if it, certain things develop fast enough, it would, sort of negate the need for DVs, or it would just change sort of the value prop in a really fundamental way? Are there anything like whether it's, regulatory overreach, could be like technical challenges, could be, the lack of just sort of interest from like, society in terms of social apathy. So just curious what you see as like the biggest existential risk to, DV adoption.
That's a good question. The good news is that, we have these like various value props, right? Like security, node operator count, performance. So I think DVs are sort of resilient, but if I had to give one, it's probably not coming from on-chain, but more from off-chain, because at the end, distributed validators can be seen as security software. And another entity that does security is actually insurances. So if instead of running distributed validators, you just pay someone to take the risk for that downtime or for that performance, I think they could potentially capture some of that market. Mm-hmm. Now, what's quite interesting is we've partnered with a couple insurance companies that are already insuring operators, and they're giving like discounts on the premium for those that are running distributed validators. So that was quite interesting to see that even them are starting to think about how like the risk profile of the operator change. But still, they could just say, look, we'll pay you if anything happens, right? Instead of going for DVs, an ETF could just say, yeah, we'll get insured,
Yep. No, the slashing insurance market is still, it's robust, but it's definitely still like any other insurance market in the new product category. I think it's still very much in its infancy, and it will get increasingly sophisticated. When you speak about, sort of the adjustments that are already being made by the slashing insurance and the insurance industry, right, around the space to, account for better technology that lowers the overall risk of an event happening. That would potentially pay out a policy, as an example. I think we're already seeing that information and sort of the technology around it getting digested in a very efficient market type way. Toma, I guess anything that you want to highlight in terms of like initiatives or programs that are really active right now at Obol as it relates to either bringing more, I'll call it constituencies into DVs, or, continuing to, sort of educate the ecosystem and the sort of broader, potential prospect universe. Anything you want to highlight that's going on inside of Obol today in terms of initiatives or otherwise?
100%. Cool. So I can plug your new incentive program. So we do recognize that there is some barriers to migrate your validators. Again, this is your infra. We're securing the only credible network out there. Everyone's very serious in this industry about this. So we understand people can be a bit slow at moving things and dubious, right? So we're offering incentives at the moment for people to move. So that's 2.5% of the Obol token supply per year, distributed in equal tranches each week. So the sooner you migrate, the more of these rewards you'll get. So that's definitely, I think, something that can help, especially with the staking APR really going down, the EF talking about cutting issuance further. So hopefully that little boost can help depositors and operators move their stake to a better and more resilient setup.
No, absolutely. And I think to your point on the incentive for boosting yield, right, and with the lowering of frictions based on Pectra upgrade and so forth, make that I would think quite enticing, especially to different types of stakers, whether that be solo stakers or frankly more sort of institutional folks or even the restaking ecosystems and protocols. So Toma, one of the questions we ask everybody who comes on to High Stakes is for their hot take. And so do you have a particular bold prediction or hot take for the rest of 2025? So something that you think is going to happen that no one is thinking about, talking about, and is sort of way out there. What would be your hot take?
I think staking will become super boring. The reason I'm saying that is I was watching from the sideline the Bitcoin mining industry get super pro and suited up. And it's crazy. These guys are all suited up. And I think that's going to happen the same to the staking industry. I think there is still a lot of YOLOing in staking happening today. I think the industry will professionalize a lot and a lot of people will get caught off guard. And that's all going to happen with the staking ETF coming in. So yeah, I think a lot of people will be caught by surprise and not be pro enough to professionalize along with the rest of the industry. I think, unfortunately, will become as boring as Bitcoin mining.
Okay. Well, let's see what happens. With that, let's wrap it there. Toma, CEO of Obol Association, thanks again for joining us on High Stakes. We hope to have you back on soon. It
was a pleasure, Alex. Thank you.
Thank you.
Keep exploring and keep innovating. Learn more at validationcloud.io and follow us on X and LinkedIn to stay connected as we continue to shape Web3 for institutions. This is High Stakes with Alex Nwaka, signing off.